Oh, that's right. It's the man, it's the machine, but our nameplates are switched for tonight. Bradley and Wyatt back at it in the Twitter streets, in the YouTube streets, in the best ball streets, in the redraft streets now. It's August, Wyatt. We're now doing some. I did a big gorilla. I just finished one of those on the FFPC. Our friends over at the FFPC it's a great platform if you want to do some low stakes or high stakes drafting. Wyatt and I are going to talk about some draft tips that are most essential for you to crush your drafts. Wyatt, it is drafting season, so as we're getting into this, the degenerates have been doing this since January, since February. We've been drafting, we've been noticing ADPs. This is what we came for, right? To get to August and September. We've got 1 month until kickoff. But one of the things that I noticed, and I think you'll agree, is that in these streets, we'll start to notice things are a little softer now. The tourist season is opening. And my first tip, of course, is to take advantage of tourist season. The Patrick Mahomes going ahead of Jalen Hurts or Jaden Daniels plays are going to be more common now that we're entering August. So taking advantage of the tourists is where we can print, I think, more often here in August.
Yeah, I mean, it's true. As tourist is a good way of putting it. The weekend warriors maybe is another way to put it. But I mean, we are the very small percentage of fantasy football players, right? That we are in this all year round. We're drafting all year round. There's nothing wrong with those who are in their one redraft league or a couple best ball leagues, and that's really it, But sometimes that does happen. They come in, they see some ADPs, and they're like, what? Like Patrick Mahomes in the 80s? Like, I love Patrick Mahomes. And they take him a little bit earlier. So that, that tends to happen. But I also think that, there are advantages to be had throughout the year, because when we are doing 2025 drafts in February, we're projecting a lot, right? And I think there's advantages to be made there as people are making stands on players that early. Sure. I know when I'm drafting in February, a lot of what I'm doing is just trying to scoop up ADP value as it happens in the drafts. Keep an eye on certain players that I like, that I know I want to be ahead on, and attacking those, but also trying to project what players we can rely on for some stability. Who do we think's not going to have their situation change much from February to September, stuff like that. And I think you can find some edges there as well.
Certainly. And we are doing our research during January and February. And so sometimes, especially in the rookies, our stances will change. And throughout the process, we think of Bashal Tutin, right? He was a last round pick in most pre-NFL draft, pre-NFL combine. And then he has an amazing combine and goes off and it just rise and rise and rise. And Bashal Tutin instead, last night on the FFPC in a draft I was in, went as running back 47, the end of round 12. So it's all over the place. That's where you can I was overexposed to Bashal Tutin even before the combine. And so those types of research pieces is, look, you're drafting 18, 20 guys. That's maybe a 2% edge, but we're all trying to get edges over each other. And those are the things that can accumulate over time and create super teams. Ultimately, that's what our goal is, to not just, I'm going to finish in the top half. No, we want to parlay those into big wins. So, but enough February talk, Wyatt. The people are here to know about how to draft in August. And one of the things that comes to mind for me in August drafting is that narratives are materializing now. We're getting a lot more clarity about situations that maybe we were just projecting for a while. So what comes to mind for me are the Rashee Rice, Jordan Addison. We don't have clarity on Quinshon Judkins, but I think that's again a narrative that is materializing right now, where he hasn't signed. He isn't getting the reps. He isn't getting the practice. We're seeing him drop in ADP in the draft boards. The team has distanced themselves from him. And so like that's a narrative again that is beginning to materialize for what is the range of outcomes. Now it's the chance that Judkins hits, it becomes a lot smaller the
Mhm.
closer we get to the start of the season. And the last player I want to mention in this like narratives are materializing thought is Joe Mixon. Mixon is also falling pretty significantly due to the knee injury, but there's not been a lot of positive buzz coming out of Houston for Woody Marks, especially Nick Chubb, Damian Pierce. We know what he is. So
Yeah.
for the fall, right, that's a narrative that is materialized. We'll get more information the closer we get, but all those players, their situations are becoming clearer the closer we get. So monitoring these situations pretty closely is what we want to be doing.
Yeah, Jordan Addison's suspension was pretty much what we all expected. Like the 3 games was to be expected. What I want to see happen now is where does his ADP go? Because no matter how much we say that something is baked into a player's price, it never truly is. Like, what was a good one? That's like before Kirk Cousins was going to Atlanta last year, where he was like projected to go there pretty heavily. People were steaming up Drake London and Kyle Pitts' price, and they were saying it's baked into the price. He signs, then Drake London's like a 3rd-round pick, and and they continue to jump. Like those kinds of things happen
Right.
year in and year out. Jordan Addison, we kind of always knew he was getting a suspension this year. It was basically always going to be 3 games. In fact, I think it's in the CBA that he gets it for his offense. And I bet he's still going to drop in price, and I'm definitely going to be attacking it. Rashee Rice, we still have some information to find out, but we can kind of project a general range and work off of that. He dropped a little bit, but he honestly hasn't dropped all that much. I think that's a lot of confidence in the community that he's just going to pick up right where he left off when he comes back, which I would kind of expect as well to an extent. Like he more time to rest his injury. He should come back fully healthy when he gets there, So I would expect that. Quinshon Judkins, that's the one that I'm really hands off almost completely. Like I don't know how far he'd have to fall before I get back into it, but like him not playing the season's on the table because
Sure.
I don't know when he's going to sign with the Browns. And then Mixon, I'm like keeping a very close eye on how much he falls. There's a chance that, I talked about this with Evan Ringler, our analytics king from Player Profiler, on the newest press coverage that should be out tomorrow about Joe Mixon. And we were both in on him to start the season, start the offseason. And then this has scared us off to the point that we just want to see where he falls. And now we're interested in Woody Marks because a couple of factors. One is that I think they're going to be safe with Joe Mixon, take their time on him. This is a team thinking about the playoffs. They don't need him for the beginning of the season. So I would imagine that they let him take his time. And I think he probably needs a little bit of time. I don't think they're adding anybody else to the backfield because I think they already made the moves they're going to make. They traded a future 3rd to move up in the 4th to draft Woody Marks. So they already have a lot invested in him. And I think they probably signed Chubb when they did because they knew something was wrong with Joe Mixon more than was available to us that we knew. So I don't really think they can add any more assets to it. So if that's the case, like I agree, I don't think Nick Chubb really has anything left. So I'm interested in Woody Marks from that aspect. And also the aspect that this running game might not be that great this year. If Joe Mixon, even when he does come back, maybe he's slower than he was last year, which he's not the most efficient running back to begin with. Maybe they could get into more pass heavy offense. And if that's the case, I mean, that's what you draft Woody Marks for. That's, he is a pass catching running back and almost only a pass catching running back. So I imagine he could be somebody who could help our lineups, even, what is like a Timu, James White kind of thing going on with Woody Marks, maybe. So yeah, I'm interested in Woody Marks now. He was kind of always a last round pick, basically everywhere. I imagine that's going to change a little bit over the course of this last month of draft season. We'll see how far he gets up, but I would imagine he doesn't get too high.
Woody Marks, Timu, James White, love it. I love it.
Are you writing that down?
I most certainly am. Nick, our producer, is going to make sure that that's a thing. Right now on drafters, Mixon has an ADP of 98.2 overall. Last night on the FFPC, Mixon went as the running back 30 in the middle of round 8.
I
You
need that to go a
mentioned,
little bit further.
yeah,
Just a little bit further.
I've seen him fall into the 90s across DraftKings and other sites. I'm not afraid to click him if he falls further, given the lack of depth behind Mixon. Like, I'm not worried about like, oh, when Mixon comes back, it's gonna be still Chubb's role. No, like when they put Mixon back into the lineup, he's not going to let it go unless he gets hurt. So that's how I'm approaching it. Like, he's clearly still like in the depth chart, the RB1. So I'm willing to take clicks on Mixon. We were talking off air about in the pre-show meeting about Jordan Addison. And he was wide receiver 34 back in June. Now, last night, FFPC, I drafted him at wide receiver 41, knowing that he was suspended for 3 games. But Jordan Addison was the 38th overall player in best ball value rating last year. This was a player who was number 7 in rate of top 5 weeks for wide receivers last year. And now you get, and I think it's going to be an improvement at the quarterback position, JJ McCarthy. We know he's missing 3 games, but that rate is still very, very interesting for me. We know what Minnesota is from an offensive perspective. This suspension, like, I'm going to keep clicking Addison. I've already been clicking Addison, so I'll take any discounts because I was already projecting him to miss some games.
Yep. Yeah, I agree there for sure. Especially in any type of best ball format, best ball site, like Addison, I think is a great click. He is a little bit inconsistent because he is second or third fiddle, depending on how involved Hawkinson is in that particular game. But we know that he's a big downplay threat at any given point. So yeah, for sure.
So I got a question for you, Wyatt. Yesterday, as I said, FFPC, $125 entry, best ball. There was a big five at quarterback that went off the board. Jaden Daniels, Lamar Jackson, Josh Allen, Jalen Hurts. Joe Burrow was number 5. In your opinion, because it was full 2 rounds of no quarterbacks going off the board until Mahomes went off at quarterback 6 in middle of round 7. Is it fair to lump Burrow in as one of the big 5, or should we consider Daniels, Jackson, Allen, Hurts as a big 4, and then Burrow as like a 1B to that tier? Or you disagree entirely and Burrow should be ahead of some of those guys? Like, what's your take on that top 5 of quarterback?
So I actually struggle with this question every year, basically, when it comes to Joe Burrow, because there's part of me that thinks, yes, even though he is the pocket QB, but he is the one pocket QB who continues to do it. In his 3 healthy seasons that he's played in the NFL, 20.5 points, 21.7, 22.5. He was in PPR or in points per game. That's 3rd, 4th, and 10th in those seasons. So, last year it was the highest points per game of his career. Seems like that's about to repeat this year because everything's set up for that to be the case. The offense is really, they basically the same. The defense is still the same, which is the defense is terrible.
Worse, with no Hendrickson,
or worse,
probably.
Yes, or worse. It's just because he doesn't have the rushing, it is slightly more risky than those other QBs. So in my opinion, he is like just on the outside of them looking in a tier of his own. And I will not argue with anybody who drafts him at any point after those 4 are off the board. If you want to make if he gets drafted directly after the 4th one and he's essentially same tier in that draft, I'm not really going to hate on it because the proof is in the pudding, what he does when he's healthy. But he does have that slight more risk than the rest of them because of the lack of rushing that they have. So he's just not there for me.
Just not there. Yeah, I project for Joe Burrow 38 rush attempts, 130 rushing yards. Like, he's not giving you much. in
but
terms
he's
of
an
the run.
incredible passer.
He most
with,
certainly is.
with some of the best
Which
weapons in the NFL.
which is why, I mentioned that Addison was number 7 in rate of top 5 weeks. Chase and Higgins last year were both 1 and 2.
Bonkers.
And yeah, we're getting massive spike weeks from these guys. That's what we want in the best ball streets. But even from a week to week perspective, like there's no fear. You're firing up Joe Burrow regardless of the matchup. Like you're not really streaming when you're drafting a quarterback that high. You're not looking to stream your quarterback or put him on the bench. Like you're investing that type of capital. Burrow is a must start every week, even in bad conditions or against tough defenses. Those are situations that, as you're drafting, like you got to draft as though you're right. Number one. And two is I was thinking about a strategy last night, like the yin and yang of like a high upside player and a high floor player. And if I'm drafting one of those, especially the top 4, but in Burrow included, I'm not yin yanging. I'm just like, this is my guy, especially in a redraft league. There's no one else. Like I'm not targeting anyone else. I'm taking shots on handcuff running backs instead of a second quarterback to roster on a 20 roster team. So I know lots of people love the yin yang concept or like getting the backup quarterback or trying to play matchups. But in like a redraft league, when you are that drafting a quarterback that early, just leave the second quarterbacks off your roster.
Yeah, shout out Andrew Cooper for the yin yang tight end strategy that he kind of coined years ago, which I do think is a viable strategy for redraft leagues, specifically at tight end. But at quarterback, I agree with you. I do not like doing that. In like your standard 1 QB league, I think if you want to take a risky shot on a quarterback, you just take the risky shot on the quarterback. And if you have to stream, then you stream. And that's
Right.
okay, because each and every year you can stream quarterbacks to a top 12 finish. It's been proven over and over again that you can do that, because after the elites, it starts to become a flat tier of quarterbacks.
Right.
And you can kind of find similar production off the wire more often than not.
And that's kind of ties into another like draft observation I made last night was from pretty much Baker Mayfield all the way down to Trevor Lawrence. So like quarterback 8 to quarterback 20. I think it's less about, less about whether they will do well, and more so about your stacking, especially in best ball.
Yeah.
But like, who did you draft earlier? Did you draft Mike Evans? Did you draft, Garrett Wilson? Justin Fields kind of makes sense. Did you draft Justin Jefferson, JJ McCarthy? Like the ranges of outcomes for many of these players are very similar. And so when you're looking at, well, who should I pick? Well, who did you draft earlier? Because we know that, yes, best ball stacking is very popular, but I also want to encourage people who are listening to stack in redraft leagues. That's something that I have the Stack Hunters podcast with Dan Williamson. Like it's part of the brand, but I'm encouraging you to look at like where are the points coming from? Because if you're getting Justin Jefferson points, you're getting JJ McCarthy points. And if you're really taking a stand that Jefferson's going to be the guy who's going to feed him. And that was, heck, Wyatt, I've got a story for you. Like 6 years ago or 7 years ago, when the Rams were like the Rams, I traded all of my players because I started like 0-6, 0-7 in my home league, and I'm very proud of that league. And I was like, I need to do something different. I can't just like be 0-6. This was before I got into content, and I traded all of my players to get all of the Rams because they had Gurley and Woods and Goff and Cup. Sure. And I just straight up stacked, and it ended up winning the championship for me. Like I
Ridiculous.
Won every single game moving forward. I found the offense that I wanted, and you don't have to hyper stack like that or like wildly stack. But the point is that the points have to come from somewhere. And so if you're drafting, Nico Collins very high, and you are in on Nico Collins, then maybe a late round quarterback could be for you, CJ Stroud.
Yeah, stacking in redraft is still a very smart thing to do, in my opinion. For anyone out there who is curious why stacking is good even in redraft, is basically when you draft a player, you're making a bet that that player is going to do really well this season. And when you draft players on different teams, those are unrelated bets. They have no influence on each other. But when you draft a quarterback and wide receiver, it is now a correlated bet, and they actually influence each other's performance for the season. So it's kind of a way of consolidating those bets. So you have to be right about less things. So even in redraft, it is beneficial. Now, I'll tell you, in redraft, you don't want to go too far with that normally. Now, This is awesome that you won a championship with all the Rams, but more often than that, that doesn't work, right?
Right.
Best ball is one where you want to do that a little bit more, where you want to try and capture like big 1 week potential, for tournaments in those playoff weeks, but not as needed as much when it comes to just your standard redraft league. And I do agree with you about the quarterbacks in general. Like, I think that it is a pretty flat tier overall. I think you down to QB 20, like I can make really good points for all of them and feel reason to be excited about them. And it does kind of depend on who you've been drafting earlier in that draft. There are quarterbacks in the area, obviously, that I prefer and really like. And a lot of times I draft towards them, like I'm going into the draft saying like, I want to draft Emeka Egbuka because I also want to draft Baker Mayfield, or
Right.
I'm really in on Cortland Sutton at cost this year. So that leads me towards liking Bo Nix as well, because I think that they could be very good this year, things like that. There's also quarterbacks in that area where I'm not as worried about stacking. I think they can be good on their own, like Drake May. And, that can kind of depend. Like if those things don't line up, you always have to have plan A, B, C, D, E all the way down as you're drafting in your head. Like I drafted Justin Jefferson in the first round, and then I draft T Higgins in the second round. And I'm thinking, oh, maybe I'll get one of the, Justin, JJ McCarthy or Joe Burrow, but they go to other drafters. You have to have an idea of what your exit plan is now for this draft, where else you can go with it.
Yeah. Where else can you go? Where else can you stack? Or is there a late stack that you can target? If you got sniped on somebody, is there a wide receiver like you can go with a Juwan Jennings, and maybe it's Brock Purdy, who you can get a little bit later. Maybe you go with Brock Purdy because he fell a little bit, and then you can get a Brandon Ayuk later. Those types of things that, okay, well, this quarterback value has fallen to me. I'll snatch it up. And then there are players afterwards that I can backstack almost.
Mm-hmm.
All right, we're going to take a short break. When we get back, we'll talk about some tight ends that we should be targeting, whether there's appropriate tiers at the beginning of our drafts. And then we'll talk about some exposures. Maybe, for those who are drafting a little bit more higher volume, we'll talk about maybe some philosophies and things that have worked, maybe not worked as we go through the draft season. But now a word from our sponsor at the FFPC.
Hey, why do we partner with the FFPC? Because they have the widest variety of fantasy football formats, and it's the easiest place to find all types of fantasy football contests in the world. What if you want to play for high stakes? Well, they have a $6 million prize pool with their Fantasy Players Championship. They also have way too early best ball leagues that start in February and Dynasty leagues. They have the closest thing to a liquid market for orphans that there is in all of Dynasty. And the FFPC has sponsored us for half a decade because we are actually delivering information that can help fantasy gamers, and they're generating so much interest and bringing in so many new users, casual users even. The FFPC creates a unique experience where you can both compete against the best and make money. Use promo code UNDERWORLD to get $25 off your first team. $25 off your first team at the FFPC with promo code UNDERWORLD. Go get it!
Bradley and Wyatt back here on Man versus Machine, talking draft strategies, draft tips. And we actually have a question in the comments from Colby Watson. Shout out Colby. He has the 10th and 11th pick in his draft today. Neighbors Collins fell, and they traded Nico Collins and DeAndre Swift for Igbokwe and Gibbs.
So is this a redraft trade during the draft? If so, super cool. I am proud of your league for doing this. I hope that there's hasn't been any issues when it comes to that. This one's pretty easy for me, and that's I want Gibbs and Igbokwe. I like Gibbs more than Nico Collins this year. I like Emeka Igbokwe more than I like DeAndre Swift this year. So pretty simple.
The man and machine agree on that one. It's pretty clear. Gibbs has a pathway. He was the RB2 overall last year. Clear pathway to be the he has a pathway to be RB1 overall. There's a lot of chatter among analysts of whether Gibbs can do that. He went as the RB3 in last night's FFPC draft. So there's, you're getting access to elite, and I have Gibbs ahead of Collins, and we like Igbokwe. I don't hate DeAndre Swift as maybe some others do, but you can't pass up the opportunity to get Gibbs. And I think the drop off from Collins to Igbokwe is not as large as that Gibbs to Swift differential. Cool. And you still have a wide receiver. You still have Neighbors. You've got Neighbors and Gibbs. So you're sitting pretty there, Colby.
Yeah.
You love it. We love it. Okay. So I have projected Trey McBride as my tight end 1, but the consensus has been Bowers tight end 1, McBride tight end 2. It's the touchdowns for me. I think there's going to be positive touchdown movement for Trey McBride. Brock Bowers also kind of got dinged last year with the touchdowns. I think he can also get there, but is it clearly Bowers, McBride, and then Kittle as like the 1B? Or how are you seeing these top tier tight ends? Are you just willing to take Kittle later because he's cheaper?
I like them all. I want to be drafting them all. Happy to draft them all at cost. Though I do have them in that order. Bowers slightly ahead of McBride. The difference there for me between those two is that McBride has the touchdown regression, but I don't think anything else can change for him for the better. Whereas Brock Bowers, I think, had gotten an environmental upgrade as well.
Sure.
So that just kind of breaks the tie for me. And I would say that those are the 3 elite tight ends, but Kittle's not the same tier as Bowers and McBride for me. He's kind of like in his own half tier after them. If they're tier 1, he's tier 1.5.
Sure.
But then tight ends don't start again to tier 3, if that makes any sense. There's there's a serious drop off after that.
Yeah, and looking at the draft from the draft board from FFPC compared to where I've been seeing on Underdog or DraftKings or Drafters, Laporta went off as the tight end 4, which felt a little early. Hawkinson went off as the tight end 5. That probably moved up because of the Addison news. I think Hawkinson does get a little bump with Addison getting suspended, and then also maybe week 1. Justin Jefferson maybe is at 85%, 90%. They're probably watching that hamstring. But 90% Jefferson is still you're not benching him, even if something is cropping up. But Hawkinson, I think, is the big recipient in the weeks that Addison goes off. So I'm not opposed to Hawkinson there. But yeah, you mentioned it's just a steep drop off because we look at Laporta's touchdown dependent. Hawkinson was getting targets, but that was before Addison was added. And he was dealing with knee injury a couple years ago, the ACL. Kelsey, we know what the narratives are surrounding Kelsey. I think Njoku is still undervalued. We talked about Njoku during the tight end.
Yeah.
During the tight end pod a couple weeks ago. that he's probably the one tight end that I think, well, he's mispriced, and then Mark Andrews might get an early season bump with Isaiah Likely news that he's going to be missing a couple weeks or possibly week 1. Baltimore's also has Super Bowl aspirations, so it wouldn't surprise me if they play conservative with Likely in week 1.
Yeah, I have no problem with Laporta and Hawkinson as tight end 4 and 5. That's where they are for me. The thing that I care about with them is where they're going overall, what
Yes.
round they're actually going in. Laporta is a little pricey for me. Hawkinson, I think, has a similar outlook to Laporta, but is around cheaper, round or 2 rounds cheaper. So between those, I've been going Hawkinson more often than Laporta, although I'm not drafting like a ton of Hawkinson either. David Njoku being one of the main reasons why. Kelsey, I'm pretty much off this year. I really think he's at the end of his career. I don't know how much he has left, and he could get there on pure volume, but I'm not sure how much that pure volume will be there the whole year. I expect him to be pretty okay during the first 6 weeks. I'm not sure how good because we still have Hollywood and Xavier Worthy there. But once Rice is back, like, I don't expect much of anything for Travis Kelce. So I'm way off that. But yeah, once we get past that, I think that's where it starts to get interesting. I know we both love Njoku. I'm also way in on Tucker Kraft. I think that's those are where I start dipping back into the tight end pool. If I'm not going elite, that's the point in which I start liking tight end prices again.
I've been clicking a little bit more of Jake Ferguson lately, Wyatt, and I think it has to do with like doing a reflection on what happened last season and realizing that Ferguson was injured for most of the year, and he did pretty well 2 years ago, and didn't get any touchdowns last year. I think the offense was mostly broken for Dallas, and when you have an injured Dak, all of it parlayed to a bad season for Ferguson. I've been clicking him a little bit more, but not not super aggressive. He's just a player that if I miss out on those elites, I'm okay with a Ferguson stack with Dak later on and feeling like, okay, I got piece of Dallas. And we've seen like the 3 touchdown upside with Jake Ferguson. Like it was crazy, but at least we know that Dak has a history of throwing to the tight ends, and Ferguson, they signed to an extension, a pretty nice extent. What was it? Top 7 in tight end pay. So it was a good at tight end 14 there. I can see a pathway for Jake Ferguson to pay off a modest tight end 14 ADP.
You know, as you started talking about Jake Ferguson, I started workshopping this take in my head that, I don't know, I'm going to say it, and I think it's going to sound crazy, and I might get some hate for it, but I don't know, is Jake Ferguson just like the big arbitrage to Sam Laporta? Possibly the third tight end, third target on the offense, 2 offenses we feel like can score a lot of points. I can see some similarities there on the bet. It's just, I don't think Jake Ferguson's as good of a tight end as Sam Laporta. Like, don't hear what I'm not saying here. But he's going 6 rounds later or so. Like, I'm trying to do the math in my head right now of where
Laporta
I know they tend to go.
went in round 4 on FFPC last night, and Ferguson went in round 9. So 5 rounds.
5 rounds there. Yeah, I think on Underdog it's what's 7th round versus 12th round. Yeah, so 5 rounds about difference between them everywhere. Yeah, I think Ferguson is an interesting player to go for. In one, you're just like your standard redraft league. Ferguson's probably not on my radar as much because you don't have to dip down that far. You can probably get your tight end before that if you want to.
On so many tight ends. Sorry. If you pass on so many tight ends already, like, just keep passing.
Yeah. I don't know that, but on any best ball site where you need multiple tight ends, or any really deep league where you plan to draft multiple tight ends, I think Jake Ferguson makes a lot of sense. And in standard redraft leagues, I think he is somebody who's going to be, one of those waiver wire heroes a lot of weeks, someone that people are streaming frequently.
Love it. The one of the last observations, then Wyatt, I'll give you the floor for a couple things maybe to close us out. the more I draft players, the flatter I feel like my exposures are getting. And like certainly I have player stands and like my projections are there, but as I'm like getting through, I'm in slow draft purgatory. I think I told you I was in like 160 slow drafts.
Yeah.
And part of me is like, okay, I don't want to not have any exposure to X player, even if it's 1%, 0%. Like, I don't want 0% of a player. I feel like those such hard stances have backfired over the years for me. And maybe you've experienced it, maybe you haven't. Maybe you're like Bradley, like it is what it is. But I think of like a Quentin Johnson last year, who I was just zero out. Like there was no chance. Like worst wide receiver performance
That was
that
the
we've
same.
ever just zero. And he was okay for some weeks, and like we had a new head coach and he was a starter. And so I think, you know, as I'm going through all of these drafts, these like 150, 160 drafts, all like I'm clicking at different points just to get a little bit of exposure when it makes sense of stacking. And maybe I'll come back at the end of these and look at the exposures and say, you know what, I overlooked these players a little too much, or maybe because I drafted Lamar Jackson early, I was targeting Zay Flowers, and that limited my exposure to Travis Hunter. And not because I didn't like Travis Hunter, but because I had to make a decision between Hunter and Flowers, and it was not at the turn. So, like, that may be something to keep in mind is if you are drafting so much, like, are the stacks and the strategies that you're taking limiting your exposures to other players that maybe are still good, but sprinkling in, like, I have a few Jamar Chase Brown, T Higgins, and then Joe Burrow, but then like I'll have a Chase Higgins and then a not Chase Brown, or a Chase, but no T Higgins. And then like that fits for that. I want like a rotation of those stacks as well. So like sprinkling in players where I don't want to have zero exposure there.
Yeah, I mean, this is a pretty nuanced conversation when it comes to like portfolio management, essentially, in best ball, because that's really what we're talking about when we're drafting this many teams. I know for me, I tend to come out a little flat, and it depends on where we define flat as, like what percentage. So, you know, like on Underdog,
8.333%.
I was gonna
right?
say, so you know, like Underdog, where it's 12 people, 12-person drafts, the average market share for any player for a person is 8.3%, right? Because
Right.
only one person can take him a draft. So if, you know, like flat for you is just being a little over that, I'm not a flat drafter. I'm a flat drafter to me because I think that there's arguments to be made for being a very aggressive drafter where you have exposure shares to a player over 30%.
Right.
And I don't have any issue with that because I think the reason to do that is when we're drafting in these tournaments, if you feel very strongly about a player, you want to have the best chance to realize your take if you're right. So you want to have as much exposure to them as possible. Now you can obviously go too far with it because if they get injured, then you know, like you've just ruined so much of your portfolio. Right. For me, like a lot of my most drafted players tend to be in the low 20s, and a lot of that is because my exposures fluctuate a little bit over the course of the offseason. Since I'm drafting all year, I tend to like some players more at certain parts of the year and like other players at other points of the year as their ADPs fluctuate. Now, there's some players where I'm just liking all year long, and they tend to be my highest exposure players, obviously, like Emeka Buka. Like, I've just been drafting him the entire offseason, regardless of price. I'm just in. I have been. He's one of my highest drafted players.
Right.
Same with Trevion Henderson. Like, I've just continued to draft him, whatever his price is. Now, he's someone whose price hasn't really changed all that much, but I just say all that to say, like, I have like some high 20s, a handful around 20, and then we start getting into like I have a lot of players at like the 16%. And then when it comes to like whether you should be fully fading a player, I think you have to get into like how scared are you of that player beating you this year if you
Right.
don't have any exposure to them. So like last year, I was not afraid of Quentin Johnston beating me in fantasy football. So I drafted virtually none. I don't know if I actually drafted a Quentin Johnston last year across all my teams. Now, I would say that he didn't beat me, but I was certainly wrong about him for last year because I think he scored 8 touchdowns. I think almost all on broken coverage, but he did score 8 touchdowns. And that certainly helped best ball teams, but like he didn't explode so much that I feel like I lost to it. So when you come across a player that you're like Tyreek Hill this year for me, I'm really not in on Tyreek Hill. For many reasons we've talked about on this show before. I believe we talked about it specifically during our wide receiver episode that we did a little bit back ago, if anybody wants to watch that. But he is somebody who could absolutely beat me. Like if Tyreek Hill is just 2023 Tyreek Hill, I'm going to look like an idiot.
Yep.
So I am drafting a tiny bit of Tyreek Hill. I'm not drafting 8% of Tyreek Hill, but I want to be like 4 to 6%. I want to have some teams with Tyreek Hill on them. So yeah, it's just kind of like weighing how risky it is to completely fade a player, which is probably easier said than done. Obviously,
I think I'm at 1% Tyreek Hill and underdog right now.
I haven't checked recently. I think I'm probably around 4%. I'm probably going to pull that up real quick and check it while we're talking. But yeah, how much do you fear this player beating you in tournaments this year is really deciding how much you fade a player completely.
Definitely. Shout out to one of my buddies in the space, the best ball bro, Felix Castro. Wyatt, I don't know if you've ever met Felix, but he's great. He won the $1 million a couple years ago and on DraftKings. And it was interesting when I talked with him about his strategy for that year. He was like, Najee Harris. Najee Harris is my guy.
Yep.
And so I think he drafted. He is still on it. Shout out to.
He's never stopped drafting him.
I mean, I would if that was my guy, but but Felix, his strategy was one that was very unique, and I don't think there's been a term for it. Maybe there is, but I like to call it the dagger strategy, where like he was drafting Najee Harris everywhere. I think he had like 70+% exposure to Najee Harris, like not just a stand, but like no matter what, he was doing his darndest to not leave the draft without Najee Harris. And so he was just getting Najee and, Devontae Adams, Najee and Tyreek Hill, Najee and just getting combinations surrounding that one. So it was just one dagger of that player in the entire draft board. And Najee doesn't get hurt. Najee had a high floor. And I mean, Pittsburgh wasn't great, but Najee never lost it
had a big week 17 that year too.
Yeah.
Against
Najee never lost it for him.
Ran in a touchdown when there was no need to. They could have just kneeled the ball and won the game. And he still ran for that touchdown. But I remember it, if you can't tell, pretty well. But like now, I do not have the balls to draft 70% of a player like Felix did. Now it worked for him, and that's awesome. I'm very happy for him. I don't know if I could draft that much of a player, but the strategy surrounding that is something that I think is very vital to fantasy football. You don't want to be drafting copies of the same team in the same tournament. You could do it in separate tournaments. That's fine, no issue. But you want to give yourself as many bullets to try and win the whole tournament. And if you have the same team, you're just taking away chances from yourself in a way. Now, there's an argument to be made that that's not the case because those teams have to make it out of separate pods over and over again to eventually get to like the finals, So if you feel very strongly about that team, having a couple copies of it isn't the worst thing in the world because the chances of them all getting there is pretty unlikely. The chance of getting one team to the finals in most of these tournaments is very unlikely. What's the best ball mania is almost 700,000 teams in there.
Yep.
So chances of getting there pretty tough. But giving yourself those different combinations is very important to try and find. We're all trying to find the best team to win it all, and sometimes the best team doesn't win it all because the way the pods work. You could have the best regular season team. They're just crushing. They have a bad week 15. That team's done. It's just, the nature of the beast.
And you face a team that is just healthy. And
there's this thing like, so I am no statistician. I have a novice understanding of statistics, I would say, for someone. I think, a lot of us probably think we're way better statistics than we really are, because it gets pretty deep. But when we talk about like optimal, people don't realize how difficult it is to achieve optimal. Like the teams that win Best Ball Mania are not optimal. They're like 90% optimal. Finding like this 99 percentile optimal team is like actually almost impossible in any given year or any given point. I don't know if people find it. But I say that to say, like, all this stuff can happen during the year. You're just trying to give yourself as many chances to get there in the end and give yourself a shot. So taking different, pathways in your draft than you're used to sometimes is a good idea, just to try and find the different combinations of players. Sometimes you pull up a player to the first round who's not going into the first round because you want it, like you're at 12 and you pull up like a Lad McConkey to the turn because you want to give yourself a different combination than most players have at that turn. Doing stuff like that, I think is beneficial when you're drafting a lot of teams.
All right, Wyatt, any last words for the people before we call it for tonight? So many draft strategies. Making sure you're following Wyatt at Wyatt B_FF on the X Machine. You can follow me at FF Stalder. Wyatt, close us out. What's still on your mind as we're giving these draft tips?
We can try and make this one really quick. I just want to ask you, because I am someone who always gravitates towards 0 RB drafts, right? We always say, stay water, you attack the draft as it comes to you, right? But we all have tendencies. Mine is to go 0 RB. But boy, is it tough this year with the way running backs are being ranked. There are so many good ones. You get into these 4th and 5th rounds. I'm like, yeah, I got to get a couple of these boys. What do you how are you feeling about that real quick?
Oh, I think there are guys that I'm very happy targeting, but also like I'm just sprinkling in. It feels like we talk about the yin yang strategy for tight ends, but like last night I went yin yang for running back, and it was James Conner at the end of round 5 and RJ Harvey in round 6.
Mm-hmm.
And then I attacked the handcuffs pretty much the rest of the way. Bigsby, Algier, Jerome Ford, Raheem Mostert, Emmanuel Wilson in round 19. So I'm okay with that. It also, it depends on where you're drafting from, because if you're drafting from the 9 spot, 10 spot, 11 spot, 12 spot, you aren't going to get much McCaffrey now. The only running back that's coming to you in round 1 or at that 1-2 turn is Ashton Genty. So that's probably, if you're going like running back early at that spot, that's probably the only running back that you're going to get regular exposure to, because then it's a teardrop in most rankings and ADPs. Devon Achane, Derrick Henry, Jonathan Taylor, like Kyron Williams, like that falls. You can see that there's a clear differentiation there. So if I'm not getting a Gibbs or McCaffrey or Bijan, like I wanted to sprinkle those in. I'm not afraid of that. Is staying water, as you say, but also, yeah, just yin yanging these running backs once we get into round 5, round 6, and beyond. I think there's enough there. Like Pacheco could very well turn out to be a league winner, like RB27 going off in the 7th round. He is looking good in the tape, in the preseason. We'll see if that translates in whatever work that they hopefully give him. But like there's a pathway for a top 15, top 12 running back season from him. Caleb Johnson can fall into the end zone a few times if he gets the goal line work, because we know what role Jaylen Warren is. So like there's narratives, there's pathways for these. All it takes is one flip of the card for any of these, like DeAndre Swifts or Chuba Hubbards or Travion Henderson, to hit. So there's only really one. I view it as like a one flip player, and I'm okay with taking shots on those types of guys.
Yeah, for the last thing I'll say is that normally I find myself only liking like a couple running backs in every pot and like in pockets. And this year I really feel like there are a lot of running back profiles that I like throughout some of those early and mid rounds, unlike I've really seen before.
Awesome. We're here. It's man, it's machine, taking advantage of the pockets. Woody Marks, Tamu, James White, putting closure on it. Fantastic. It's Bradley, it's Wyatt. We will be meeting up here soon at the FF Expo. Go Expo.
Yes.
Shout out to Bob Lung for organizing it again this year. It's going to be a blast. And look forward to seeing you in Canton here in just a moment here, Wyatt.
Yes, very, very soon. And anybody out there, if you're at the Expo, make sure to say hi.
All right. Till next time. Good luck in the fantasy football streets, everybody.